Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alex Cooley. I'm the director of the Harriman Institute here at Columbia University, and it is my great pleasure to introduce tonight's Harriman lecture. Now, here at the Institute, those of you who follow us quite closely know that we put on about 150 events a year, and they range from the small book seminar to the large World Leaders Forum that we co-sponsor in conjunction with the President's Office. But this is, in my opinion anyway, not to bias, the most special of the events, because at the annual Harriman Lecture, we honor a figure of great public distinction, of tremendous intellect, of someone who has been influential in how we practice, how we view, how we frame issues in the region that we engage with, which is Russia, Eurasia, Eastern Europe, and the Balkans. And today's speaker fits all of those categories to a T. The OSCE representative on freedom of the media, Dunja Mijatović, Bosnia-Herzegovina, took over the post in March 2010. For more than 2 decades, she worked on human rights, media law, and regulation, institution building in transition states, and ways to deal with hate speech and dangerous speech in complex post-war societies. During this time, she acquired extensive experience in promoting respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms through international dialogue and cooperation, media law and policy, and internet governance. She has in-depth knowledge of new technologies with the emphasis on digitalization, convergence, and the internet. Mijatović was a founder of the Communications Regulatory Agency of Bosnia and Herzegovina. In 1998, she helped to create a legal, regulatory, and policy framework for the media in a complex post-war society. She was also involved in establishing a self-regulatory press council and the first free media helpline in Southeast Europe. In 2007, she was elected president of the European Platform of Regulatory Agencies, the largest media regulators network in the world. She also chaired the Council of Europe's group of specialists on freedom of expression and information in times of crisis. Mijatović is an expert in human rights, communications and media strategy, and regulatory media policy. She was awarded the Médaille Charlemagne in 2015. The award honors a European personality who has made a unique contribution within the field of media to the process of European unification and development of a European identity. She is also the recipient of the City of Geneva Peck Award in 2015 for her work on the issue of the safety of journalists and media freedom in Ukraine during the crisis, and her, quote, exceptional personal commitment for the promotion of freedom of information in the whole region, unquote. The International Peace Center in Sarajevo awarded her the Freedom Prize in 2010 for her work and activities on the struggle for freedom, peace, and development in Bosnia-Herzegovina, Europe, and the world. The media freedom environment in the OSCE's 57 states, when she assumed her responsibilities, dramatically shifted into a very difficult period of media repression and rollback of journalists' rights that continues to present day. The previous OSCE media representative, Miklos Harasi, said that she has been the best and most effective advocate on the issues of all 3 representatives to date. Dunja has traveled the most, making some of the first trips by an international official to Kiev, Ukraine during the uprising of the Maidan in December 2013, and traveled as far afield to Mongolia, discussing media freedoms and the rights of journalists with the newest member of the OSCE. Tireless and tenacious, principled, persistent, enormously energetic, and fearless, Dunja is known for her truth-telling during the August sessions of the Vienna-based OSCE Permanent Council, as well as when she is engaged in bilateral discussions. One of her advisors said she is known to say that she is allergic to geographic balance in issuing her critique when it comes to the rights of journalists. But I'd like to name just a few so that the crowd gets a sense of what she has engaged with. During her tenure that compelled her to visit Baku frequently, Azerbaijan's media freedoms have dramatically deteriorated, resulting in the 2015 arrest of leading journalist Khadija Ismailova and her subsequent jailing last year. The Azerbaijan situation is dire, forcing journalists and civil society leaders to flee if they are not already jailed. Mijatović visited Turkey on World Press Freedom Day in 2012, visiting journalists who had been jailed. Delivering a keynote address here at the Harriman Institute in March 2015, Mijatović declared that the media environment in the Western Balkans had regressed to the hostile post-war environment in 1999 that was also characterized by a new level of violence directed at women journalists online. And she addressed this new phenomenon by convening a conference in Vienna that produced a new publication, quote, "Countering Online Abuse of Female Journalists," unquote. Other international organizations have now this troubling issues, including the Council of Europe. But when it comes to Russia, Dunja has been frank and has earned her the enmity of its foreign minister, who later publicly complained of her ill treatment of Russia during a Belgrade press conference last year. For example, she flew into Crimea to remind the regime that journalists' rights to report during the hostilities was sacrosanct and left on the last plane out before the full Russian invasion in 2014. But Dunja has also eloquently raised her voice of concern against discrimination of Russian journalists in Ukraine. In fact, she also reminded the Russian Foreign Ministry delegation and my fascinating exchange with Foreign Minister Lavrov on social media. The tragic events that took place in Paris when several writers and cartoonists of the satirical Charlie Hebdo magazine were killed by terrorists, Mijatović condemned the violence and the deaths, declaring, quote, "Violence against media is an attack on freedom of expression, which underpins all democratic open societies, and I condemn this act in the strongest terms." I should also mention that Sarajevans have adopted deep respect and affection for Mijatović's now global trajectory. Ida Cherkez, the Associate Press Bureau Chief, says that Dunja has embodied the values of Sarajevo and taken them globally. She is a role model, and particularly for girls, Cherkez said. And in post-Cold War difficulty, she serves to remind Sarajevo and Bosnia itself that they can be a part of the world and do it again, thanks to her. Another Sarajevo actor, Haris Pasovic, a playwright from Sarajevo, said, "Her work and actions over the years have been key to freedom of the media in Bosnia and establishment of professional standards." There are so many pressing academic and policy issues that we now encounter. Maintaining the balance between civil liberties and dealing with security challenges, sorting through this new media environment and debating what does and what does not constitute propaganda or free speech, understanding the transformative impact of new technologies, and getting to grips with how government's controls over the media space is increasingly a tool of authoritarian manipulation and even soft power. Dunja's title and topic could not be more relevant or timely: free expression in the age of security threats, a view from the catbird seat. For effective and stalwart contribution to the media freedom of the OSCE area and the region that is our own research focus, please join me in welcoming this year's Harriman lecturer, Dunja Mijatović, to the Harriman Institute.
Thank you very much, Director Cooley, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends. It is a great honor for me to be here today to give this lecture to such a prominent audience. It is also wonderful to see many friends, many people that I work with for so many years, many people that share the same passion for free speech and freedom in general with me and several of my colleagues that came to this lecture with me from Vienna. But let me first start by thanking Columbia University, the Harriman Institute, and its director, Alexander Cooley, for inviting me to hold this lecture. I'm truly honored. Let me also extend a warm thank to the dedicated staff of the Institute, and particularly Tanja Domi with Columbia University, a real guardian angel, if I may say so, of the Balkans, of all of us coming from the troubled part of the world, and somebody who truly always understood and loved these troubled kids coming from the Balkans, but also giving us the platform, the place to share our concerns, to talk about all these issues that are troubling this region for so many years, and trying to raise what is important for us if we want to be part of the global democratic society. The second of my three-year mandate ends early next month. So I think it is also timely to reflect and also look forward to discuss the issues that we know to be critical for free expression and free media in the coming years. Alex Cooley already mentioned several things that I will try to touch upon during this presentation. When I came to the office in 2010, the OSCE region looked completely different. The threat from Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations somehow was reduced. The Arab Spring was about to start, and Moscow and Kiev enjoyed pretty good relations. I'm not by any means suggesting that there were no threats to free expression and free media at that time. In 2010, there were indeed threats. At all times, the freedom to express ourselves has been questioned and challenged from many sides, often blatant, sometimes more concealed. Like today, journalists were harassed, beaten on the streets, even killed in many OSCE countries, in high numbers just for doing their jobs. Critical journalists were imprisoned on all sorts of fabricated charges. Internet regulation was introduced in numerous states, and the financial crisis in 2009 had led to increased media concentration, just to mention few of the concerns. Still, I would dare to say that there was another atmosphere, one of optimism, trust, and expectations. Today, as we all know, this has changed dramatically for different reasons. We are living in a more dangerous times. Recent terrorist attacks and new lines of conflict are fundamentally altering and challenging the way we think about our basic human rights, such as freedom of expression and privacy. We see a shrinking space for civil society. Journalists and human rights defenders are increasingly subject to harassment, intimidation. NGOs are being restricted, labeled as foreign agents, and media freedom in general is deteriorating. Throughout this presentation, I will refer to two major events that, in my view, as the OSCE representative on freedom of the media, based on the interventions I made, based on the assessment I did with my team, marked tremendously everything that we are facing now when it comes to respect of human rights, but also what I see as the challenges for the future. The first one is conflict, as we say at the OSCE, in and around Ukraine. And the second one is the attack on the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo in 2015. Why? I will explain a bit later. You heard a bit about the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation that I come from, and I will not bore you with the details about how we were established and why, but I will mention a few things that I think important, particularly because of our topic today, because security is mentioned, human rights are mentioned, freedom of expression is mentioned. The founding idea of the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation, in 1975 was to reduce tensions and improve relations between the countries of the East and West, between the countries of NATO and Warsaw Pact. The countries concerned signed the founding document called Helsinki Final Act, in which they made numerous commitments to each other. One of the basic principles to advance the relations between the states was to improve the fulfillment of human rights as a fundamental component of security. But those were, like on many other documents and in many other international organizations, just wonderful words on paper. Why do I say this? I say it because I see what is happening within the region. And it seems to me that all those words that the states should be honoring are somehow just staying great words on paper. And this has to change. In 1997, a German politician, the first OSCE representative on freedom of the media, Freimut Dove, had the wise idea to create the office I'm still heading, to act as a watchdog on the member countries to see how they are doing in living up to their commitments in the areas of free expression and free media. It was a great idea. If you think something like this would be possible nowadays in the 21st century, I would say it would be impossible to establish an office like this. And that is why I repeat over and over again that the mandate and the institution needs to be protected, because we will need it in the future. The representative task is to sit, as you saw the title, in a catbird seat and observe what goes on in a free media, in free expression in 57 countries, which we call participating states of the OSCE. The position has given me the opportunity, the almost unique opportunity, to observe media freedom developments and related issues both up close in each of the countries and as an organization as a whole. And it's difficult. We are the small team, 15 people, trying to catch up all the cases that we see are popping out of the box almost on a daily basis, and very much related to any issues that I will mention today, but I will, of course, focus on the issue of security and how this affects media freedom and freedom of expression, not just within the OSCE region, but beyond. One of the outstanding features of the OSCE is what we call the comprehensive multidimensional concept of security, developed within the Helsinki process that I already mentioned. And today, our security, in my view, has become one of the biggest threats to freedom of expression and freedom of the media globally. And it seems that the future of free expression is going to be dictated largely by security concerns related to security issues. In such a context, human rights defenders, journalists, bloggers, media in general, often find themselves in opposition to their government in many states of the OSCE. In fact, we have already seen a clear shift towards more security-driven regulation affecting our precious liberties, including the right to speak our minds freely. So it's not just about journalists, it is about all of us, about citizens being able to express themselves freely. For the sake of security, we appear to be hell-bent of attacking our fundamental rights to express ourselves and to express ourselves in private. And the attacks are taking place throughout the OSCE region, which my office is tasked to monitor. Safety of journalists is still number one. Even though we live in the 21st century, we talk about digital era, revolutions, internet. Safety of journalists online and offline is the most important topic and something that we have to look at, again, I have to say, unfortunately, on the daily basis. Journalists are being attacked and threatened, and not just them, their friends, their family members, and it goes on and on in those vicious circles. And this trend has escalated in the past few years. More than any other event, last year, I believe that the brutal attack on Charlie Hebdo cast a shadow over the OSCE states and beyond, and defines the era in which we live. 12 people, including 8 journalists, were killed for cartoons that are regarded as disrespectful, even disgraceful by some parts of the society. And that is legitimate, that you do not like certain things. But do you go and kill people because of that? That is a question that we have to continue repeating and trying to find the answers, how to avoid these kind of situations. The horror of the attack lies in the notion that someone can be killed and have others defend the action simply because they express views that offend. Shockingly, in the aftermath of the attacks, there were insinuations also coming from our part of the world that the journalists had brought the attacks on themselves. As one editor sarcastically commented, the Je suis Charlie placards have not even been cleared from the streets before the discussion turned to the importance of avoiding further offense to anybody. And many were saying it was horrible that happened, horrible that these people were killed, but my view as a representative was that there is no but. Violence is a red line. People should not be killed for the views they express. Simple as that. And something that we keep forgetting, also in democracies, there is no human right not to be offended. It's simple as that. Sometimes it's very difficult to accept it. It's painful for many people and for the societies, but it is true. And we should not forget about it. We need to avoid a vision of free speech as something opposite to the prevention of intolerance or other threats to social cohesion. In fact, separating those damages both. I fear a development where we start putting restrictions on ourselves, what we say and do. Out of fear, somebody or someone might be offended. This is the silent war on free speech, in my view. Violence, threats, and other sorts of intimidation can never be seen as a part of being a journalist. Nevertheless, journalists are still being killed, beaten, harassed, and detained mainly because they are investigating and reporting on government officials and about uncomfortable truths. And you probably notice that I'm repeating all the time as some kind of mantra. Journalists killed, intimidated, threatened, beaten, killed on the streets. Because we have to continue repeating it. And we also have to continue repeating the names of those people that were killed and names of those people that their murders were never investigated. Because that's the only thing we have. Those countries that are not honoring the commitments have to be reminded repeatedly about the importance of investigating these horrifying murders. Violence and the threats are something that is happening in many states, and we cannot avoid it. But there is a need for a strong condemnation coming from the state officials, not to mention the work of the judiciary and what they need to do in order to investigate. As I said, most of these attacks and murders go unpunished. Attackers and masterminds remain free, and I'm constantly calling on the authorities and governments of the OSCE to investigate and prosecute. In order to raise the awareness of the impunity, my office, together with the Serbian Commission that is working to support the investigation and prosecution of 3 murdered journalists in the 1990s, Slavko Čuruvija, Dada Vujasinović, and Milan Pantić, produced a campaign as a small signal, as raising the awareness of the importance of investigating these murders. And we use this video, a clip, as a tool for other countries to raise the awareness. We translated it in many languages, and we try to send it to Russia, to many other countries where there is a problem with impunity. The award won some prestigious international awards, including a lion in the Cannes for Advertising Festival. It's very short, and I would like to show it as one of the tools my office used in order to remind not just governments but also civil society about the importance of investigating murders and attacks against journalists.
Newspaper! Newspaper! You want to know the truth? Want to vanish from the face of the earth? Newspaper! This is not a game. Life is worth nothing here. A house burns down easily. A car can explode. I can get you on the street.
You won't even know.
You won't even see.
So as I said, this was translated to many languages and sent to mainly public service broadcasters in those countries in order for them to start broadcasting it. What is also important to note that everything that you saw in the video, all the threats that you heard, if you heard it, were based on the actual sort of true facts and the cases that we had to deal with. So we used it as an example of what is actually happening to certain people. Now I will turn to Ukraine. For over the past 3 years, my office has documented an assault on free media like no other in the modern times in the OSCE region. 8 journalists were killed, over 300 beaten and detained, and countless other harassed. Unfortunately, the crisis in Ukraine clearly showed and still shows why a security organization like the OSCE must look at media freedom situation. As the Greek playwright Aeschylus observed already 500 years BC, in war, truth is the first casualty. This was also the case with the conflict in Ukraine. At the very beginning of the crisis, in March 2014, I traveled with my team, 2 members of the team are here with me, to Crimea, to Simferopol, as we received reports of violence against journalists, armed forces targeting offices of media outlets, cutting off television broadcasts of Ukrainian channels, and early signs of propaganda. And we came across something that we will also show you. It's very short. But what I would like to tell you is, it's in a way personal, but that's what I felt when I landed to Simferopol in March 2014. We arrived from Kiev to Simferopol. We came out of the airport, and you will just see it. And for me, it was very plastic and horrifying experience. And in a way, Sarajevo revisited. I was born in Sarajevo, it's my hometown. And the atmosphere, the way people looked at me, the way people were looking at each other, fear, uncertainty was already present there. And it was very clear to me that there is something cooking, something bad, and something that is going to affect society tremendously. And I'm really sorry that I was right. But during this time, we managed to get to the city. We managed to meet many Ukrainian journalists. We managed to listen to them, and I managed to do something which I'm very proud of. I managed to send a signal from Simferopol to the world about what is happening there and what might happen in the future, because we already had cases of journalists being attacked and beaten on the streets. And during this period, we were also detained by so-called green men and some self-defense forces. We escaped with the last plane going back to Kiev. After that, all lines and all flights were canceled from Simferopol to Kiev and Istanbul, and it's still only possible to travel there from Moscow to Simferopol. So Fran, if you can just show, this is just when we arrived, and what we found out is the demonstrations, staged demonstrations by elderly part of the society that was obviously paid to protest. And then we were detained. You can see people that detained us. It was filmed by the Ukrainian journalists that actually were so courageous and wonderful, particularly 2 ladies that I'm all the time mentioning, Valentina Samar and Tatiana Mikatev, followed us from Simferopol, the center, to the airport in order to make sure that nothing happens to us. So you will see their faces as well.
Hello, I'm sorry. Can I ask you some questions, please?
Later on.
Later.
Later? Where?
Приехала дама.
Не буду его на слежку брать.
Dunja.
На слежку не будешь?
Как ее зовут? Dunja Mijatović?
Dunja Mijatović.
Mijatović. Хорошая женщина, приятная такая. В общем, вежливо сказала, что нет, потом все будет на конференции. Мы хотели только поклониться пану или паночке. А вот сейчас мы едем в гостиницу «Украина». И там нам скажут правду, что все-таки у нас цензуры нет. Или не скажут. Гостиница «Украина». И здесь уже собралась протестующая толпа. Они просят free press.
This is Ms. Dunja Mijatović. Silence. Please. Just to announce, this is Ms. Dunja Mijatović, the OSCE representative on freedom of the media, who is here to discuss the media freedom situation. If you have questions about the other parts of the OSCE, I can give you a contact for that.
The most important thing is that you stay safe.
Самое важное, чтобы вы были в безопасности.
And this is my message to everyone.
И это мое основное заявление всем.
Hands off media.
Руки прочь от СМИ.
Hands off journalists.
Руки прочь от журналистов.
Law enforcement agencies make sure that they are safe.
Правоохранительные органы должны обеспечить безопасность журналистов.
And that would be a message from the OSCE representative on freedom of the media.
И это основное заявление, которое я хотел сделать.
Да.
Я вас вчера слушал. Я назову вам фамилию. Let's go in.
Ну вот. Вот, собственно говоря.
Вывели через черный ход.
Да, до свидания. Эх, кажется, мы не успели выбить грант. Так, мы врываемся в митингующую толпу.
2 человека, Антон и еще кто-то ко мне в машину.
Если они приехали с добрыми намерениями, почему не прячутся от народа?
От коричневой чумы. Они не хотят. Вы выйдете с народом. Поговорите с народом. Куда вы убегаете? Народ хочет вас слышать и видеть.
So the most important thing is, of course, that we came home safely, but the message that I managed to send, and it was also with the help of Christiana Mampur, who had an interview with me just upon my return, and I managed to put a sentence out that was also then sentence that I used at the beginning of my report to the Permanent Council in Vienna to all 57 states, telling them that media freedom is a reflection of the overall security situation. From my perspective, the situation in Ukraine is alarming, with the risk of further deterioration unless it is immediately improved. And this was an early warning, part of the tools I have in my toolbox as a representative, warning them and telling them that the security situation is alarming and that media is, as usual, a first target. The situation in Ukraine has also showed all too clearly the detrimental effect of propaganda for war and hatred on free media and journalism. And when I talk about propaganda, again, I go back to my part of the world, because we cannot, all of us coming from former Yugoslavia, cannot forget about the effect propaganda, Milosevic's propaganda, had on our society. The way hatred was injected among people, division, all these things that actually led to horrifying war, genocide, and created scars and bruises that are not visible but are there. And this is happening to Ukraine and people there. And I thought, again, naive, this cannot happen anywhere, not in Europe, after the war in former Yugoslavia. My office has been the only international institution trying to help countries to deal with the issue of propaganda. It is an extremely challenging, very sensitive issue, as it is primarily political, and secondly, it is exceptionally difficult, if not impossible, to define what constitutes propaganda for war and hatred. And this is also important to emphasize, propaganda for war and hatred. In November, we produced a discussion paper to facilitate the OSCE participating states in formulating national and international law and policy toward the current spread of propaganda. I think we have publications here. They are there for all of you that are interested to look at it. 2 weeks ago, we brought together 200 media experts, journalists, diplomats, policymakers, and governments representatives to Vienna for an expert meeting to discuss the different aspects of phenomena of propaganda and its effect on freedom of expression and media freedom and society. Propaganda is only one byproduct of war and conflict. There are many other serious issues that affect journalists and media freedom. Since the outset of the Ukraine conflict in 2014, my office has spent considerable time and resources on working with Russian and Ukrainian journalists in confidence-building measures, almost mission impossible at a time of crisis and conflict. But I truly believe that building bridges, even in a time of crisis and conflict, is crucial for the future of journalism, dignity of the profession, and dignity of people that are trying to remain journalists in a very difficult circumstances. Senior representatives from Russian and Ukrainian journalist unions and associations have regularly now for almost 2 years met in Vienna to discuss the ways to improve professional standards and safety of journalists. They called for a release of their colleagues. They try to work as much as they can, and the OSCE is offering them a roof in order to have these discussions. Of course, we cannot solve the problems, we cannot solve the conflict, but we can work on building confidence and building bridges, which is also part of the work OSCE is and should be doing. We have also initiated a project where young journalists from both countries work together on TV, online, and print reports. One will be published very soon, probably already next week, a documentary, 2 documentaries, and a magazine. During the past 6 years, I have also seen an explosion of legislation relating to the internet and its free, safe, and open use. So much so that in 2012, I commissioned a survey of laws relating to internet freedom across the region. The book turned out to be upwards of 400 pages in small types. The fact is that the interference with the internet is an all-time high. Websites, blogs, and social media platforms are being blocked, filtered, and shut down in many of the 57 participating states. Instead of investing in media and internet literacy, the countries are more willing to invest in blocking and filtering. And this is happening in all democracies, but also in the emerging new democracies. And then you can only think what can happen in the countries with still totalitarian regimes. And the traditional forms of censorship, harassment, and prison sentences for online journalists are there too. With the internet being the front line for free expression around the world, the development is worrisome to say the least. In Turkey alone, there are more than 100,000 websites currently blocked, and it is not uncommon that entire social media platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube are shut down to mute dissident voices. And it's happening more and more. Turkey is not alone, far from it. Across the OSCE region, governments are increasingly taking legal and administrative action to ruin the free expression on the internet, often on national security grounds. It is my view that national security is in many cases just cover to allow unpopular, critical governments to seize control of the internet and block pesky social media sites. An open and free internet is desirable for the creation of public debate and should be duly protected. But nowadays, I see more and more countries trying to restrict this free flow of information and use the benefits that we have. Of course, we need to be aware of the threats. We need to look at all the issues that are problematic, and we have to be realistic. But at the same time, this reality is showing us that most of the time the restrictions are because of critical voices that are trying to reveal corruption and crime in society. Not to mention voices of people that want to make fun of the politicians, which is also something that should be allowed in a democratic society. But more and more we see the restrictions. During the past year, I have become alarmed by the growing number of reports from across the OSCE region and beyond about how female journalists and bloggers are singled out and fiercely attacked. And I mention this in a context of a discussion of the security because I think it's becoming more and more important. The female journalists targeted mainly report on crime, politics, and sensitive and sometimes painful issues, including taboos and dogmas in our society. These online attacks tend not to address the content of the articles, but instead degrade the journalist as a woman. Those attacks are happening from Norway, Sweden, UK, Azerbaijan, Turkey, US, the Balkans. So there is no region that you would say there are attacks on women journalists and bloggers happening more than in some other region. And it's a topic that we try to cover with several events and also publication that we brought here with the recommendations to the governments how to deal with this. For some female journalists, online threats of rape and sexual violence have become part of everyday life. Others experience severe sexual harassment and intimidation. Female journalists have been forced to close their accounts on social media because of targeted campaigns of threats and intimidation. Verbal stalking online has continued for others with harassment in their physical environment. And many of those courageous journalists, they came to talk to us and to share their stories and testimonies that are available online, but also in our publications. We are continuing with these projects. We are also trying to make connections with other international organizations, with the security agencies, because this is not something that just one office can solve. We need to engage law enforcement agencies, we need to engage psychologists, we need to train police in order for them to know how to deal with this. Not to mention judiciary, that is not capable of dealing with these kind of threats in many countries. Without doubt, again, I have to mention the terrorist attacks in France in 2015. This attack seemed to have created a momentum for lawmakers and policymakers to rethink the concept of security, which is our topic today. Questions are being raised, and I will just pose several. Is enough information being gathered? Are the police's powers to search and analyze data great enough? Should there be restraints on the use of encrypted and anonymous communication? The internet is exploited by terrorists to glorify terror, to incite acts of terrorism, to radicalize and recruit terrorists, to disseminate illegal content, and to facilitate for communications between terrorists. Shouldn't intelligence and law enforcement agencies get better access to our digital communications in order to prevent this? Shouldn't we be willing to give up a little bit on our fundamental rights such as privacy and freedom of expression in order to feel safe and secure? One of the questions I keep hearing. Governments are also increasingly applying criminal or national security measures to bypass protection traditionally offered to journalists by conducting searches of editorial offices and journalists' homes to seize unpublished material stored on digital devices. Those developments do not only have a fatal and chilling effect on investigative journalism, but they cannot be justified on the grounds of the protection of national security. Many disagree with me when I talk about these issues, but I'm always open for a discussion. And this is my view based on my talks to journalists, to social media activists, to NGOs, to governments, in order to try to solve some of the issues. Surveillance activities may fundamentally alter the way the state protects the freedom to seek, receive, and impart information. Any legislation that allows government snooping must be narrowly down, proportionate, and include guarantees as a basic precondition for investigative journalism that confidentiality of journalist sources would not be compromised. And nowadays, that's one of the very difficult issues to deal with, how to protect journalistic sources. Accordingly, an effective and thorough judicial review of attempts to reveal journalist data must be provided for in any legislation that affects journalists' basic rights, including the confidentiality of sources. It is also of the utmost importance to maintain the right to communicate and via encrypted technologies. As it was highlighted in a recent report from a dear friend of mine, a new UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression, David Kay, encryption and anonymity provide the privacy and security necessary for the exercise of the right to freedom of expression in the digital age, and it may also be essential for exercising other human rights. It is also important to remember that introducing regulation on encryption, among others, allowing for backdoors for governments can slide in, will also make encrypted files vulnerable for terrorists and other criminals. And it seems we keep forgetting about this problem. At the very outset, I think we need to dismantle the idea that security and liberty should exist in some sort of balance with each other, meaning that the gain in one come at the expense of the other. Security and human rights should not be looked upon as opposite or contradicting values, particularly not at the OSCE, that is Organization for Security and Cooperation. Governments and societies must recognize that there is no reason to excuse or to justify the erosion or violation of the fundamental human rights which form the bedrock of the modern democracies. The challenge of our times is to understand that security is a component of human rights. It is somehow shocking that we have to discuss these issues nowadays, but it seems to me that we have to continue repeating it. Without the full enjoyment of human rights, there is no security. And there is also not full enjoyment of human rights if we do not live in a safe society. So how to come together? How to make sure that these issues are not discussed in two parallel worlds and they have to come together? We have to have discussion that is talking about these issues at the same time. We need more conferences, more forums where these things can be discussed at the same level, and not just sometimes journalists and civil society discussing issues of human rights, criticizing the governments, and on the other side, governments talking about security without recognizing the importance of the respect of human rights. And who would challenge the fact that governments have to protect the society? They have to make our society safer. There is no question about it. And it is a legitimate right of any government to make our society safer, but not at the expense of human rights, not by restricting freedom of speech, not by blocking, not by going to journalists' houses and trying to reveal their sources. And unfortunately, this is happening as we speak. The idea of the full enjoyment of human rights and security was brilliantly quoted, and I will quote the Benjamin Franklin quote, almost iconic quote nowadays. It says, "Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." I do recognize, as I said, and fully respect the importance of making our society safer. But what I see as the OSCE representative on freedom of the media lately doesn't look good. The laws that are adopted, the way they are adopted, the speed they are adopted is something that is going to affect our freedoms, and it's already affecting tremendously. Fighting terrorism as well as revealing and prosecuting other serious crimes require principled thinking and a firm and steady approach. All necessary mechanisms protecting free expression and media freedom must be preserved in order not to obstruct journalists' work. As the OSCE representative on freedom of the media, I am mandated to closely observe those laws, policies, and other forms of intervention by participating states, which might interfere in the exercise of free expression and free media. And this is when we come to the problems. When I criticize the countries, we have governments getting angry because they do not want to be criticized. No government wants to be criticized. But in a way, the mandate is seen, or I can say that the way I see it, the moment you are appointed, you are given a license to criticize, and you should use it as much as you can. Otherwise, there is no use of the mandate. All these problems, they have to be exposed. There is a place for acquired diplomacy, definitely, but most of the governments, when they receive letters, they do not pay that much attention as they pay when I raise my voice and make some of the foreign ministers angry. But that is a beauty of the mandate. That is how the mandate was crafted in order to remind participating states of the commitments that they voluntarily agreed to honor. Nobody pushed them to be participating states of the OSCE, UN, Council of Europe, or any other organizations. So why there is a problem of reminding them if they do not follow everything they agreed to do? And I think I exercised my mandate in full. I'm still doing it. I still have a few weeks, and I will do as much as I can. But being silent in this catbird seat doesn't mean anything. You need to use the voice, which is the most powerful tool of the mandate, in order to protect human rights, in this case, freedom of speech. Security has become one of the biggest threats to freedom of expression, I already said. And in fact, we have already seen a clear shift in security-driven regulation. And I will just mention a few countries. Just consider anti-terror law in Turkey. In effect, since 1991, this law is now being used to round up alleged terrorists and others, including members of the media. Some of them I've been visited in prison. In Turkey today, there are more than 30 journalists in jail, prosecuted and convicted under a law designed to fight terrorism, but that almost all independent media organizations say is being misused to jail critical media. Under this law, merely reporting on controversial topics could land a journalist in court. Dissenting voices, although still present and persisting, are under threat. In the Russian Federation, the Duma adopted changes in the Code of Administrative Offenses last year. These changes substantially increase penalties for media found to be producing or publishing materials containing public calls for or publicly justifying extremist or terrorist activities, although terrorist and extremist activities are never specifically defined. So lack of definition is also a problem. In Canada, the bill C-51, intended to fight terrorism, is still under consideration in Parliament. The last draft criminalizes a number of vague offenses, including advocating and promoting terrorism, or recklessness in carrying out your activities could lead to terrorist acts being committed. I cannot think of nothing as confusing as such vaguely worded legislation that has the potential to determine whether anyone who simply disagrees with government policy is found to be criminally liable for someone else's potential behavior. In July last year, France passed a sweeping new surveillance law that gives the government broad powers to monitor the mobile phone network and the internet. The law allows for new communication monitoring practices and investigative methods, and it has given law enforcement agencies special surveillance powers almost without judicial oversight. Following the terrorist attacks on Charlie Hebdo and the horrendous attacks in Paris last November, the French Parliament declared a state of emergency, giving the authorities very broad reaching powers including blocking of information and surveillance. In January, the state of emergency was extended, even though it was heavily criticized for its restriction on freedom of expression and the right to privacy. A similar law is currently being discussed in the UK. The draft investigatory powers bill, among other things, gives law enforcement agencies the right to collect and require internet service providers to maintain users' connection data for up to a year. The bill also contains proposal covering how the state can hack devices and run operations to sweep up large amounts of metadata. In Spain, criminal provisions approved in 2015 regarding access or dissemination of extremist content pose a severe threat to freedom of expression. In 2012, in the US, authorities secretly seized 2 months of office, home, and cell phones records from up to 20 phone lines assigned to the Associated Press reporters. All these cases I raised publicly and also in the letters to the governments. And there are numerous other countries. But I've chosen somehow to use several examples that are related to democracies, because I think they should lead by example. They should do things that should be used as an example for the others that are trying to change their legislation affecting free speech. They should not make these steps that are really affecting media freedom and freedom of expression tremendously. Regardless of how those laws are written, they will be interpreted and applied by human beings, flawed humans with their own prejudice. It is exactly this that scares me the most now when I'm on the way to leave the office. Even well-written laws will be interpreted by law enforcement officials, prosecutors, and judges predisposed to seeing security and freedom as a zero-sum game, with security outweighing all other concerns, to the absolute detriment of our basic freedoms. It is my firm belief that all measures aiming to increase security must be accompanied by meaningful counterweight protecting human rights. In short, we must have effective and transparent mechanism for civilian oversight of new security measures. These are indeed challenging times for freedom of expression and its advocates. In this climate of non-tolerance, fear, and anxiety, it is more than ever needed that we step up for the values we believe in and that form the bedrock of our modern democracies. It requires firm thinking, requires courage, and a principled approach. More than ever, it is important that governments take all possible measures to fight pressure, harassment, and violence aimed at preventing opinions and ideas from being expressed. More than ever, it is needed to create a culture allowing for freedom of expression and free media. Governments must work for a diverse, inclusive, and vibrant civil society, both at the national and international level. But this should not just stay words on paper or my voice and voice of other colleagues working in the same area. We should see a clear movement. We should see more political will coming from the states in order to tackle these issues. Government's work must go beyond safeguarding free speech in law and regulation. These may protect against infringements coming from authorities, but don't help much if citizens, out of fear of repercussion, impose self-censorship, censorship without footprints. The core issue here is how to properly protect freedom of the media and freedom of expression while fighting threats to our societies. Freedom of expression and free media play important roles in fostering meaningful debate on security issues and can help us effectively address new challenges. But the voices should not be silenced. Also voices that are disagreeing with the policies of the governments. We should be thinking, ideally, in terms of new ways to connect and bring closer human rights and security in the 21st century. Let us not forget, freedom of expression was not invented to enhance those in power. It is primarily a tool for the minority, for a little man. for those who do not have backing from the establishment, who dare to criticize and question government policies and mainstream thinking, those who dare to offend, to shock, and to disturb. Only by allowing free speech to flourish can we seek the truth and make well-informed decisions in moving our societies forward. Free speech and free media do not come naturally and can never be taken for granted, should never be taken for granted. These values must be constantly justified, reaffirmed, and strengthened, along with other fundamental human rights and freedoms. Free speech, privacy, and other liberties are the most precious values we have in our societies. If we start giving up those freedoms, we will erode the very substance of democracy and the rule of law. We must remember that human rights, though they might be temporarily suppressed, will always rebound. They will come out. And that there is no security without the free flow of information. No matter how much we hear, this is just temporary. We will deal with this, and then later on we will see how the situation will go. We have freedom of speech. It's in our constitution. We have to make our society safer. That's not the way I would like to see in any other country calling itself democracy. Freedom of expression and free media play important roles in fostering meaningful debate. By pitting human rights, concerns, and security issues against each other, we run the risk that both will be conquered, and that's the last thing we want to see. We may find ourselves with no security and no rights. Thank you very much.
John Tropp, the Post-Eagle Weekly newspaper. My question goes to enforcement. Has your office ever filed a friend of the court brief with the International Criminal Court to try to enforce war propaganda and hate broadcast violations?
No, we did not. We don't have this possibility. It is very clear in the mandate where are the limitations. We can address issues with the governments. We can work with the courts by providing them with certain information, forming amicus curiae and similar things, but we cannot, as an office, file a complaint on any of these issues.
Great. Nate, and just to say, I think we will have time to take all the questions in line, but we're going to cut it off at Hugh in the back here. Yep.
Nate Schenken from Nations in Transit at Freedom House. I know the subject of the talk is focused a bit more on the security issue and security of individual journalists, but I wanted to ask about the structural problems as well. One of the things we see more and more in the OSCE region, places like Turkey, also Southeastern Europe and the Balkans, Hungary, is state capture of the media and varying levels of oligarchic relationships between individual private businesses and state officials. So how did those, and I think addressing those is a big question that everybody working in the field is asking. What are your recommendations for unpacking these kinds of insidious relationships and undercutting the more fundamental structural issues that create very unfree media environments?
You mentioned some of the countries that I mentioned during the presentation, but there are also several other countries that are really moving in a very negative direction. And most of those countries are either EU member states or candidate or potential candidate countries for the EU. I think the European Commission, European Union, is the only organization with a clear and visible stick in order to change things. And I do not think they are doing enough. I do not think enough was done when the problem started in Hungary. I joined the office in 2010, and one of the first interventions I had was related to the package law, media law in Hungary. that created so much turbulences and problems, and I was even accused, to how dare I touch a country that is democracy, why I'm raising all these things and all these issues. And I was looking not for support because I have a mandate and I have to exercise it, but I was looking for the voices that would echo what I was saying in order to change things. And this did not happen. And I remember my words at that time. I said, if we do not deal with the problem in Hungary now, directly and forcefully, it will come back to us as a boomerang. And unfortunately it came. And we have Poland. Commission took a very different way of dealing with the things nowadays, and they were more vocal, and I welcomed it. I think they had some great statements, but we are still waiting to see what is going to happen. And how the Commission will deal with Poland will, in a way, show us the direction in which Europe is going to go in the future. If we talk about free speech and free media, Constitution is engaged as well, but I think there is already a little queue waiting to see, queue of the countries, waiting to see how the Commission will deal with it in order to start changing their laws. No matter what, I do not think that my office or other offices raising these issues should be silent. But that cannot change much if there is no political push for fundamental changes in order to protect fundamental freedoms.
Thank you. Yep.
Hi, Rabbi Moshe Rudner of Exotic Jewish History. I only represent myself, though. No one else is to blame. My question is that America, which is still something of an important country in the world, still, and which has a First Amendment, which was enshrined for the sake of the states, but also for the individuals to be able to have freedom of speech. Nonetheless, we've had, over the last 20 years or so, such a diminishing amount of freedom of speech from both state actors, or the threat, as Edward Snowden has demonstrated, the threat of state actors coming in our private business and destroying our reputations and lives, as well as from non-state actors, such as large news magazines, be they Jezebel or whatever else, that are willing to take somebody's tweet and totally, destroy their lives over this, that we see a phenomenon in this year where someone like Donald Trump, who doesn't have to worry about anything at all because he's got billions of dollars and lawyers as far as
I'm sorry, can I just ask that you get to the question part, just because we want to include everyone?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My question is, it seems to me that the Donald Trump phenomenon is a dangerous phenomenon, but that nonetheless, he's having a lot of success because he's saying things that people, lots and lots of people believe to be true and have not been able to say, because anyone who has stepped up to say them has been, thrown out of the conversation. And we have not, specifically on university campuses, have that much free speech. Anybody who will speak out on some sort of controversial subject is subject to real dangers, which I think leads to something like Trump, or possibly even worse than Trump. My question is whether you can address that. Thank you.
Okay. You knew you were going to get the Donald Trump question at some point, right?
The last thing I need, to start dealing with what politicians are saying and what are not saying. It is definitely not that part of the issues you just raised is not something that my office deals with. There are other organizations, particularly the one I mentioned, it's called ODIR, that deals with the elections and potentially problematic speech during election and all these other issues. But I agree with you, there are many problems in the United States, and we have to deal with those problems, not just the campuses, but also issues that I raised with the US government on many occasions. But, we can like what Trump or anybody else is saying, so the angle that I cover is that we have to allow people to say, things we do not like, and we have to find a way how to deal with this. For me, I have quite radical view on all these issues. For me, a red line is a violence, calling for violence. and everything else, I think, should be allowed, and the speech should not be criminalized, no matter what.
Thank you. Tanya.
Tanya Domi, I'm a professor at Harriman. So, Dunja, you arrive here at a really interesting time in terms of the American public debate and discourse on privacy. And that issue is distilled into the San Bernardino attacks that happened last year regarding the breaking the code on an iPhone, the crypto capacity to break it. And so apparently the U.S. government has asked Apple to do this, and Apple is refusing. Of course, in the business of capitalism, Bill Gates weighed in this morning and said they should give up the code and break it. I think privacy is a burgeoning issue in America, particularly in the young generation, and I think this is going to be a major, major issue confronting the American people for the next generation. I'd like to hear what your thoughts on this issue.
In a way, I think it's too early to address these things when it comes to, the work or the mandate of the office. Privacy as such was not part, and it's not part of the mandate. It is clearly freedom of expression and a broader impact on freedom of the media. But of course, you cannot discuss these issues, particularly nowadays, without engaging privacy for many reasons. We've been looking into this, particularly the communique that we issued on the role of intermediaries has some of the recommendations that can be used in this particular case that you mentioned, that is a very hot topic, not just in the United States, but worldwide at the moment. I'm working closely and listening to civil society, raising these issues, trying to see where is possibility to find a focus and a way ahead for the office to engage. But as I said, at this stage, I think it's very important to have an oversight of everything that is happening, to understand. I think there is a lack of understanding of the problem and how this can affect our freedoms. And at the same time, is this something only related to security, or is this something that is going to lead to something more dangerous when it comes to our freedoms? But at this stage, I think not just my office, but all others engaged in this should have a very sort of close monitoring process in this case, because this case is going to be used not just in the United States, but worldwide as a case. And you hear on so many occasions, China was mentioned, Russia was mentioned. So if we do this here in the United States, what is going to happen with other countries doing it?
Thank you. Hugh.
My name is Hugh Williamson. I'm the Director for Europe and Central Asia with Human Rights Watch. My division pretty much covers the same geographical region, excluding the US and Canada, of the OSCE. And I wanted to, first of all, express the deep gratitude of Human Rights Watch for your work for the last 6 years in your position. Human Rights Watch and many other human rights organizations have benefited hugely from your inspiring and your courageous work in the last 6 years. And we really appreciate what you've done for freedom of the media and freedom of expression in the OSCE region in the last 6 years. And Human Rights Watch and many other organizations have drawn regularly and explicitly on your statements, on your comments, on your work in our publications as well, as an authoritative basis for recommendations to governments across the OSCE region in terms of improving media standards and freedom of expression. So thank you very much indeed. We appreciate it. I had two questions, but thankfully Nate has already asked one question about capture of the media in authoritarian governments. My other question was a little bit linked in a way to my comment about your contribution. I do hope that you'll remain part of the movement for freedom of expression around the OSCE region. And I hope you'll continue to follow the work of those like in Human Rights Watch and elsewhere, campaigning for freedom of expression around in the region. What would be your recommendations that we can work better, smarter, cleverer to continue our work to protect media freedom in this region? You've talked about the authoritarian crackdown on the media in some parts of the region. You've talked about the misuse of security and complacency, really, in the western part of the OSCE. What would be your recommendations of how we can work better to protect media freedom? Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. Thank you for your kind words. They are extremely important for me personally, for my team, for the OSCE. The recognition, the credibility, the trust we managed to establish within civil society, but also the governments that are not always very fond of my statements and my criticism. I don't think I have a special formula. What I would say is just do not give up, do not give in, just continue kicking. There is no other way. You know, working together, international organizations, NGOs, journalists, civil society. Now more than ever, we need to join our voices and our forces. And this is already happening, but I think sometimes politics play a very dirty role, like always. And some countries that are like-minded countries that are truly protecting free speech are not eager or not willing to address issues in XY country because of political reasons, and that is damaging not just free speech and freedom of the media, is damaging democracy. And that is why we need Human Rights Watch, we need Article 19, we need CPJ, we need many other NGOs around the world raising their voices, working with the Office of the Representative, with the UN, and many other organizations. There is not much we can do more than we are already doing, but sometimes I think we forget about the importance those organizations are making in societies that are far away from the world we live in. Sometimes I have a feeling in Europe or in US we live in some kind of bubble, and we do not see the reality and the problems people are facing for just expressing their views. And how much it means when somebody just mentions the name of, for example, Hadija Ismailova, even though she's still in prison, even though we do not know what is going to happen to her, we need to continue raising this. And not just me, not just you, not just other people sitting here, but absolutely everybody. Otherwise, we lose the reason for our existence, no matter if we are NGOs or representing intergovernmental organization. I would not be able to do my work if I didn't have such enormous and genuine support from the NGO sector and from journalist associations from the very beginning. And that only grew into something that I see now as the biggest power we have, the power we should use to continue protecting free speech and free media, and not sort of put it on the side and say we do not care. But there are some other organizations that can do much better, and I think civil society should also be very critical to all of us doing this kind of job, representing intergovernmental organizations at the UN, Council of Europe, European Commission, and any other level. I think we should be more accountable and more criticized if we are not exercising our mandates, if we are not raising our voices, because then we are in a way undermining the reason for the existence of those institutions. And that's what I would like to see, you monitoring more what intergovernmental institutions protecting human rights are delivering.
Super. Well, on behalf of the Harriman Institute and Columbia University, I want to thank you for giving us this tremendous overview. Thank you very much.